Hi, I'm Fred White. I'm with LaaSer, and surprise, surprise, I'm going to talk about location.
I hear it's the most important thing.
That's it. Well, in fact, let's see. It's kind of a big deal. So I actually had a few setup slides here before getting to the meat of the presentation about wireless location and device-based determinations. I'm going to kind of skip through those and go right into a specific topic. I will point out it's kind of interesting. Right in this very room at this event 2 years ago, people were asking, is device-based location something that it can even work for public safety? How would we do that? What does that look like? And all sorts of questions were floating around about it when companies like Rapid SOS or us stood up and said, hey, this is something we want to do. There were a lot of questions about, well, I'm not quite so sure about that. And now here we are, and it's a given, right? This is going to be a part of the mix. It's going to happen. It's happening now. So it's a pretty interesting thing to watch that happen in a couple of years. So I'm just going to blow through this because we already know all that. Yes, you've seen interesting things like this. So let's talk about a very specific topic. Let's talk about routing. So for some of you in the room, this will be a problem you're very familiar with. For others, I'll give a quick overview. So in today's world, the vast majority of mobile call routing is done based off the cell sector that fields the mobile call, right? And there's a process that jurisdictions go through where they actually kind of haggle over those cell sectors because cell sectors do not align neatly to borders of jurisdictions. And so cell sectors overlap, and the abutting jurisdictions have to decide, do we route that one to this PSAP or do we route it to that PSAP? And they'll look at, population density, square footage, square mileage that's covered in their jurisdiction. And they do this on a very regular basis. And they do the best they can, right? They try to make sure that the calls get routed to the jurisdiction that can actually dispatch them help. And that's really the nature of this problem is if the cell sector-based routing sends you to a jurisdiction that cannot dispatch you help, they then have to transfer the call to the appropriate jurisdiction, hopefully. Sometimes they might not know who it is, and they might transfer it, and then that person says, oh, no, that's not it, and they'll transfer it. But whatever the case may be, and you would hope even the data would flow with the call. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So in some cases, the caller is right back at the beginning of the process answering the question again, where are you? How do we get to you? And it's not totally clear right now how many times this happens around the country, what percentage of calls it happens, and it's definitely different jurisdiction to jurisdiction just based off how the sectors align to your boundaries. But whether it's 8% of the time, 20% of the time, there's some debate, it probably falls somewhere in that range across the country as an average. It almost doesn't matter if it's 8 or it's 20 because these are the situations where someone calls and they get transferred. There is an outsized representation of negative outcomes in these calls, right? Because you've added in time when you don't have time to add, right? So routing is a really big deal. We try very hard. We don't call these misroutes, right? It didn't fail. The system worked as designed. Colloquially, maybe you'll say misroutes, but the idea here is the call got routed to a jurisdiction that could not dispatch help. That's the end. So then the question is, well, that's great, but could we do something else, right? Could we do something other than cell sector routing? And so the idea there would be route the call based off the actual location of the caller. And then the question becomes, but can you do that? Is that even feasible? So as we talk about things like location-based data flowing into the system, then it really becomes all about speed, right? How fast can you get it to impact that routing? Because as the call progresses through the carrier's network, it can be sub-second sometimes, not often, sub-second that routing decision is made. It's typically more like around 2 seconds from the time, and that measurement of time there is from the time the user presses the send button on their phone until the carrier network is making a decision about where do I need to send this call. So what we've done is we've done a lot of trials and tests, both with carrier partners and with jurisdictional partners, on a broad range of location-based stuff. But today we're going to talk just about routing. And I'm going to use 3 common use cases where routing can be an issue. And I'm also going to do a combination of sometimes where we tested with a carrier partner and then sometimes where we tested across carriers with a given jurisdiction. So this is, an easy to visualize, right? 2 very nice square jurisdictions that abut each other. But even in that case, if you see where the star is in the bottom, where the cell tower is, you imagine that cell sector is a pi wedge coming off of that cell tower. And most of that pi wedge is going to go to the jurisdiction on the right? Most of the field of coverage is in the right. Some goes a little bit into the left. And so when those 2 jurisdictions decide, how do we do this? Well, the one that's got the most population is the one that's going to take it. And in this case, it's the jurisdiction on the right. So in cooperation with a carrier partner in their production environment, this was also done in partnership with our pals, West over there, we actually went and we did some of the same measurements John was just talking about in looking at some of that ELS data. And so we made live calls on phones that had been enabled with our technology in the native dialing mechanism so that as the user dialed 911 and they placed that call, our platform was receiving information from the device. It could have been a fully determined location, so something like Google's ELS, where the operating system is telling us, hey, here's where we think the device is. It could have been individual pieces of sensor data, Wi-Fi signals, GPS, Bluetooth, anything that we could get from the device as soon as it was available, right? Which in some cases may be before the fully determined location of the device. And we use that to determine a location and an uncertainty with an appropriate public safety confidence that we can then hand to the routing decision function and say, if we've got it in time, and if it's a credible enough, accurate enough location, you might want to route on this instead of routing based off that cell sector. So this test location was identified by our carrier partner. They picked it, they ran the tests, and they placed a whole lot of different calls there in various modes. All right, turn the phone off, let it sit for 5 minutes, turn it back on and place the call as fast as you can. Do another one after the phone's been on for a while. Do one where location services have been turned off. So lots of different permutations of that test. And what you'll see there is we've drawn a 50-meter radius just for reference. Our goal was not necessarily to have 50 meters of accuracy for the routing. It could be different depending on the size of the cell sector. You can actually define that based off a lot of different parameters. But in that case, it's just for reference. And what you'll see is the locations that are plotted up there are a combination of kind of the initial location determined by the carrier network, and some are a phase 2 location. But from a routing perspective, it happened exactly like you'd expect. This isn't a surprise because of where that cell tower is. All the carrier's decisions were to route this to the jurisdiction on the right. So in that case, that would have been a call that needed a transfer to get to the PSAP that could actually dispatch help to the location we made the call. 100% of our calls determined the location was in the other PSAP and did so within the time constraints that the carrier placed on it to do the routing based off that location. So that's one example, right? Kind of side by side, nice straight line. Those happen all over the country. Then you have things like this. It's probably a little hard to see. Maybe it's not so bad if you're not at the side. So what you can see there is this is a case where one jurisdiction has like a little outcropping that's poking into another jurisdiction. So much nastier than a nice straight line. And in this case, it becomes almost impossible to define a cell sector-based routing that could ever handle that, right? Because it's a little outcropping, and you're not going to have cell sectors with that kind of precision. So this is just another example. And in this one, as opposed to working with a specific carrier on this test, this was a test that was conducted by a jurisdiction themselves, and the calls were 5 identically configured phones, 1 on each of the 4 national carriers, and 1 that had been configured with our capability. Placed 5 calls there, and the results are what you see, right? The carrier locations were as expected, based off cell tower and based off cell sector. And so all of them routed to the location not pink. Our location was identified, determined within the appropriate amount of time to have impacted location or routing, and would have routed to the jurisdiction in pink. Last one I'll do because it's just a different kind of use case. This one was also done in partnership with a carrier. This is not a jurisdictional based one, this was a carrier one. So this is a case where you've got a larger jurisdiction and there are other jurisdictions within that jurisdiction's footprint. So they are completely contained within the other jurisdiction. So there's kind of your third use case. So in this case, calls placed within any of the darker pink boxes or shapes you ideally would go to the jurisdiction of that shape, right? Because they're the ones who could dispatch the help. But because of the layout, the nature, how they sit within a larger jurisdiction, they often go to that larger outline jurisdiction. So we ran a series of tests and the outcomes were identical to the ones we've talked about before. So all of those test locations routed to a place that would have required a transfer to the location or to the jurisdiction that could actually send help. And our system integrated into the carrier system, so they were doing side-by-side comparison, had the location available to do the routing to the appropriate jurisdiction. So that's the results of the test. It's real, it can happen. We're really excited about that. We're excited about everything that's been talked about in terms of location. We're big proponents of lots of different solutions being out there to try to get location to the right people at the right time. This is one thing we are particularly interested in and super excited to say it really can work. So 2 years ago, we were saying, hey, can device-based location even be something that everyone can get excited about and agree to? And here we are 2 years later, and yeah, it seems to be. So now we're saying, hey, location before route. So get the location before you even do your routing decision is also something. So we might be where we were 2 years ago about location generally right now with routing. It's here.